The sun hung low in the late afternoon sky, spilling molten gold across the quiet frontier town of Cedar Creek. Dust rose in lazy swirls around the worn wooden planks of the boardwalk, clinging to the heels of boots and the edges of skirts alike. The town was small, more a cluster of buildings than a proper settlement. But in its narrow streets and dusty alleys, judgment came swiftly, and gossip traveled faster than the river in spring. She arrived with her trunk in hand, the leather scuffed and fraying at the corners, each step unsteady and painfully deliberate. Her shoes, though sensible, seemed ill-suited to the rough terrain, and the townsfolk, never shy with their opinions, made no effort to conceal their amusement. A sharp giggle here, a whispered remark there, punctuated by glances that lingered too long, heavy with ridicule. She walked as though she belonged nowhere, yet she carried herself with an inner strength forged by years of survival in a world that had often been unkind. She was young, no more than 21, but her face bore the quiet maturity of someone who had seen too much grief too early. Her hair, chestnut brown and untamed by the wind, fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, a pale green, darted from shadow to shadow, wary of both the visible and the invisible scrutiny. Her name was Evelyn Hartley, and she had come west seeking something she could not yet name. Freedom, perhaps, or the promise of a life she could carve for herself in a world that would not wait for pity. Yet the first hour in Cedar Creek had been enough to remind her that the frontier was as merciless in its social cruelties as it was in its physical hardships. "They said she walks funny," one of the shop girls whispered, her voice carrying across the dusty street like a whip crack. "Not like she belongs here," added a man with a crooked grin, tipping his hat in mock politeness before sneering under his breath. Evelyn pressed her lips together, forcing herself not to stumble or flinch. She had learned long ago that fear was a luxury she could not afford. Each step became an act of defiance, a whispered promise to herself that she would not vanish into shame like so many before her had been made to. Yet despite her determination, the laughter gnawed at the edges of her composure, and a creeping fear took root. A fear that perhaps she truly was out of place here, a delicate flower among the thorn bushes of the frontier. From across the square he watched. He had been leaning against the post of the general store, hat pulled low against the glare of the sun, observing with the careful patience of a man accustomed to reading people and moments alike. His name was Caleb Boone, a man of 30, with shoulders wide enough to bear the weight of the world, yet hands gentle enough to cradle life in its fragile forms. He was a rancher, known in Cedar Creek not only for his strength but for the quiet, commanding authority he carried in his presence. Men respected him, women admired him, children trusted him instinctively. And yet, in that moment, it was not respect or admiration that drew his gaze. It was outrage. Outrage that someone could mock the way a person carried herself, simply because she was different, simply because she had endured pain in her past. Caleb pushed himself off the post and walked toward the center of the street. His boots pressed into the dusty ground with deliberate weight, sending small clouds rising with each step. The townsfolk noticed him too, and for the first time the laughter faltered. There was a stillness in his presence, a silent warning that their mirth had overstepped some unspoken boundary. "Enough," he said, voice low but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. The words were simple, yet they cut through the haze of mockery like a sharpened blade. The shop girl froze, the crooked-grinned man straightened, and a few more faces turned sheepish in the sudden hush. Evelyn's eyes widened, caught off guard by the sudden interruption. She had not expected anyone to defend her, certainly not a man whose presence alone demanded silence. For a brief moment, she felt a flicker of something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. He stepped closer, not threatening, not condescending, but with a quiet strength that made the ground beneath her seem firmer, the air around her safer. He extended a hand, not in pity, not in mockery, but as a simple gesture of solidarity. "Walk with me," he said, the words carrying an unspoken promise. "No one should make you feel smaller than you are." Her fingers hovered for a moment, caught between disbelief and cautious trust, before she allowed herself to grasp his hand. The touch was brief, but it sent warmth spiraling through her chest, stirring a fragile courage she thought had been lost. Together, they moved slowly down the boardwalk, the townsfolk parting instinctively as if the mere act of walking beside him conferred some silent protection. For the first time that day, she did not feel the sting of mockery. The sun still blazed overhead, the dust still clung to her boots, but something had shifted. The weight of judgment no longer pressed entirely upon her shoulders. It had been lifted, if only slightly, by the presence of a man who saw more than what the eyes could mock. They walked in silence, the only sounds the soft crunch of boots on dirt and the faint whistle of wind through the slats of the boardwalk. Evelyn could feel his steady presence beside her, a grounding force that seemed to anchor her own tentative steps. Each stride was an affirmation, not just that she could survive here, but that she might even belong. As they rounded the corner of the general store, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square. His gaze met hers, steady, unyielding and yet warm, and she felt a pulse of something dangerous and intoxicating. The recognition that she could allow herself to be seen, truly seen, and that it would not shatter her. The town of Cedar Creek had welcomed many travelers with whispers and suspicion, yet today it bore witness to a small rebellion against cruelty. She had arrived unceremoniously, mocked by those too small to see the courage in her step. But she would not leave defeated. Not while Caleb Boone walked beside her. Not while the possibility of trust, of protection, of a future uncharted and wild, lay stretched before her like the open plains. As they reached the edge of the square, she inhaled the dry, scented air of the frontier, a mixture of dust, sagebrush, and the faint tang of leather from his coat. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed inadequate. He gave a slow nod, his own expression softening in the dwindling sunlight. "No need for thanks. Some things are just right," he murmured, and in the quiet sincerity of his voice, she understood that she had found the first glimmer of a new life. The afternoon faded into twilight, and with each step they took, the mockery of the town seemed further away, the world growing wider, and the promise of a future, no longer tethered to fear, stretched out like the endless horizon before them. Evelyn had arrived in Cedar Creek as a stranger, uncertain, wary, vulnerable. But in the presence of Caleb Boone, she discovered the first taste of something enduring, something unshakable. A quiet strength, a protective hand, and the stirring realization that perhaps, just perhaps, she had found someone who would see her as she truly was. And so, beneath the silvery glow of the approaching moon, they walked together, and for the first time that day, Evelyn felt whole. Evelyn followed Caleb through the uneven trail that led away from Cedar Creek, each step uncertain, but somehow steadied by his quiet presence. The mockery of the town still lingered at the edges of her mind, gnawing at the fragile sense of dignity she had managed to reclaim, yet walking beside him made the burden lighter, almost bearable. She did not know how to explain it. His mere nearness seemed to anchor her, as if the rough earth beneath their boots had suddenly grown firm enough to support not only her body but the weight of her fears. Caleb's horse, a large chestnut with a mane tangled from long days of work, waited patiently near the edge of the path. He gestured toward it without a word. She hesitated, unsure whether she could manage such a ride. The animal seemed far larger and stronger than anything she had ever mounted. Caleb noticed the flicker of doubt in her eyes and simply offered a slow, steady smile. "Just trust him," he said quietly. "And trust yourself. I'll be right here." It was an odd reassurance, simple in its phrasing, yet profoundly compelling. Evelyn nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and allowed Caleb to guide her up into the saddle. The horse shifted beneath her, steady and obedient, and she realized with a strange astonishment that she was not afraid. Not fully. Not while he was there. They set off along the winding trail, the rhythmic sound of hooves on hard-packed dirt like a heartbeat connecting them, though neither spoke at first. Evelyn's mind, usually crowded with worry and the sharp pangs of self-consciousness, found itself strangely quiet. There was room only for the sound of the horse's breathing, the faint rustle of leaves, and the subtle pressure of Caleb's leg brushing hers in measured proximity. "You're quiet," he said after a while, his voice low and steady. "Most people I meet talk too much or not at all. You neither. You're deliberate." Her lips twitched into a faint, hesitant smile. "I suppose I've learned that sometimes words aren't worth the effort." Her tone was dry, but her eyes lingered on him, curious despite herself. There was something about the way he observed the world, and her, that stirred a flicker of intrigue she could not ignore. "I like that," he said simply. His eyes met hers, steady, patient, and there was an unspoken acknowledgement in that glance, a recognition of shared resilience. It was rare, she realized, to meet someone who saw beneath the surface without demanding explanation, without judgment. A moment of silence stretched between them, neither uncomfortable nor forced. It was easy to imagine that in another life, perhaps this could be normal, a companionable quiet in which presence mattered more than words. Evelyn allowed herself to linger there, feeling the warmth of connection bloom in the most delicate corners of her chest, the sensation almost frightening in its intensity. "Do you always keep to yourself?" Caleb asked, shifting slightly to keep pace with her gaze. I suppose I try not to be a burden," she admitted, voice almost a whisper. "It seems safer that way." She flinched at the admission, ashamed for exposing a fragment of vulnerability so soon. "You're not a burden," he said, firm, his words carrying weight beyond reassurance. "The world's been cruel to you already. You don't need to carry it alone. And neither should you." Her throat tightened. It was easy to hear kindness in his words, but harder still to believe them. She had spent so long moving through life with her walls high and her steps careful, thinking that independence equaled survival, that accepting help was weakness. And yet, here was a man who insisted otherwise, not with grand gestures or proclamations, but with steady, unwavering presence. They rode on in silence after that, each lost in thought, though the closeness between them grew palpable. Evelyn became aware of the subtle movements that spoke of familiarity yet unspoken care. The slight tilt of his head when he observed the trail ahead, the way his hand hovered near the reins when she seemed unsure, the faint brush of his coat against hers when the path narrowed. Each small detail sent a ripple of awareness through her, a mixture of comfort and something more, something both terrifying and exhilarating. At a small clearing, Caleb guided the horse to a halt beside a narrow stream. The water was shallow, trickling over smooth stones, and the gentle murmur filled the space between them. He dismounted first, offering a hand to help her down. She took it, and for a heartbeat, her fingers lingered against his. A spark, faint but undeniable, pulsed through her, and she quickly looked away, cheeks warm. "Here," he said, gesturing toward the water. "Take a moment, stretch your legs. It's a long ride back, and you deserve it." Evelyn complied, letting the cool water lap at her boots, washing away the remnants of dust from the town square. For a fleeting moment, she felt a sense of freedom she had rarely known. A space without judgment, without expectation, without the constant sting of ridicule. And yet, as she glanced at him, leaning casually against a rock, she felt the stirrings of something dangerous. The undeniable pull of attraction, tempered by the fear of allowing herself to hope. Why did you step in for me?" she asked finally, unable to suppress her curiosity. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried more courage than she realized. Caleb's expression softened, thoughtful. "Because I've known cruelty," he said after a pause, "and I've known people who let it shape them, break them, or make them hide. I couldn't stand by and watch you be diminished for something that isn't weakness, it's strength. Every step you took through that square was an act of courage. And it deserved acknowledgement, not mockery." Her chest tightened at his words. She wanted to believe him, and part of her did, but fear still whispered that the world outside this small clearing was not so kind. She looked down at the stream, letting the water shimmer over her boots, and realized that, for the first time in a long while, someone saw her. Not the mistakes, not the awkwardness, not the scars she carried unseen, but her true self. "I thank you," she whispered, voice unsteady. "No need," he said, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Just keep walking, keep being who you are, and know that you don't have to do it alone." It was a promise wrapped in simplicity, yet it carried an unspoken depth, a foundation that Evelyn felt she could almost build upon if she dared. The sound of the horse shifting behind them reminded her of the path still ahead, the ride yet to be completed. She mounted again, heart still fluttering, aware of Caleb's steady presence beside her. With each step, each careful motion, the tension between them grew, not in a rush of passion, but in a quiet, smoldering awareness. The kind of tension that made every glance, every touch, feel charged, as if even silence held meaning. They continued on, and Evelyn realized that this ride, this journey alongside him, was more than physical. It was a lesson, a test, a slow revelation of trust and courage, and perhaps, in time, of something far deeper: companionship, understanding, and the faintest glimmer of love. By the time they reached the small ridge overlooking the ranch, the closeness between them had evolved into something unspoken but undeniable. She did not know what the coming days would bring, or whether the world would continue to be cruel, or if she would falter again. But she knew, without question, that with Caleb Boone beside her, she had taken the first step toward a life that no longer belonged solely to fear. And that was a beginning she had not thought she would ever have. The ranch sprawled before them, a patchwork of rolling fields, fenced pastures, and weathered wooden barns. Caleb had tended it for years, shaping the land with patience and grit, each fence post and furrow a testament to labor and determination. Evelyn watched it all with a mixture of awe and trepidation, unsure of where her place might be in this rugged, sun-scorched world. She had arrived seeking freedom, but she realized now that freedom was not merely escaping her past. It was the courage to face something entirely new. Caleb led her first to the barn, where the horses waited patiently. Their hooves clattered against the worn wooden floor, nostrils flaring in recognition of the scents of hay, leather, and earth. Evelyn's hands itched with nervous anticipation as she reached out to stroke the neck of a gentle mare, and she felt a surprising steadiness in Caleb's presence beside her. "You'll need to know them if you're going to be riding often," he said, voice low, almost casual, though there was an underlying intensity in his tone. "They respond to respect more than fear. You can't force them to follow you. They'll know, and they'll test you." Evelyn nodded, absorbing the instructions. She had spent most of her life in the structured confines of Eastern drawing rooms and polished floors, never learning the subtle language of animals or the nuanced measures of patience required here. Yet she found herself fascinated, even humbled, by the complexity of the world Caleb inhabited with such ease. "Start with the mare," he suggested, nodding toward the largest horse in the barn. "She's calm, but strong. Let her feel you before you ask her to move." Her fingers trembled slightly as she rested her hand against the mare's broad shoulder. The animal's warmth seeped into her skin, steady and reassuring. Caleb watched, unspoken guidance in every line of his posture. He did not hover, he did not rush. He simply existed beside her as a silent teacher, and in that presence, Evelyn felt a measure of confidence she had not known in years. When the mare shifted beneath her touch, she flinched, and Caleb's hand brushed hers in a fleeting, deliberate touch. Her breath caught at the contact, and she glanced up to meet his eyes. They were steady, assessing, and faintly amused at her reaction, though his expression remained controlled. For a moment, words failed them both. The world seemed to shrink until it contained only the warmth of his hand and the beating of her heart. "Relax," he murmured, his voice soft enough for only her to hear. "She'll feel your hesitation. Let her see your calm, your certainty. You're stronger than you think." Evelyn inhaled sharply and tried again, this time letting her touch be deliberate but gentle. The mare responded, nudging her hand with soft pressure, and a sense of triumph, however small, bloomed in her chest. Caleb's lips curved in a faint, approving smile, and she felt herself melting slightly under the attention, though she refused to meet his gaze for longer than a heartbeat. Over the next hours, Caleb guided her through the rhythms of ranch life, feeding the horses, checking fences, hauling bales of hay. It was exhausting work, physically demanding. But for the first time in years, Evelyn felt her body responding not in fear or defense, but in a quiet exhilaration. The ache in her muscles was accompanied by a deeper sensation, a connection to the land, to the effort required to nurture it, and to the presence of a man who respected her resilience rather than mocked her weaknesses. By mid-afternoon, she paused to wipe sweat from her brow, leaning against the rough-hewn wood of the barn door. Caleb approached, carrying a small bucket of water, and offered it to her with a faint nod. "Drink. You're working too hard to forget yourself," he said lightly, though there was a subtle edge in his voice, a concern that betrayed how much he noticed, how much he cared. She took the water, hands brushing against his once more, and a warmth spread through her at the contact. "I didn't realize how different this would be," she admitted quietly, as if confessing to herself as much as to him. "I thought freedom would be simpler than this." "Freedom is never simple," he said, shaking his head, setting the bucket down. "It's earned. Every step, every decision, every challenge you face, it shapes you. It's messy, and it's hard, and it's worth it. You'll learn that." Her eyes met his, searching, questioning, and something unspoken passed between them. An acknowledgement that she was trying, and he was noticing. She could feel it in the way his gaze lingered, in the subtle tightening of his stance when she stumbled slightly over a coiled rope. It was protective, but it was also something more, something compelling, drawing her attention and stirring feelings she had buried beneath layers of self-preservation. As the afternoon wore on, Caleb suggested they take a break and sit on the low fence overlooking the pastures. Evelyn perched beside him, her legs dangling, while he leaned back on his elbows, studying her with a quiet intensity. The horses grazed below, oblivious to the human tension that crackled in the air. "You've got a good instinct," he remarked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Most people coming out here, they get frustrated, impatient. They quit. You adjust. You learn. And you're not afraid to ask for guidance." Evelyn flushed, unsure whether to feel pride or embarrassment. "I guess I've had to learn early," she murmured. "Life doesn't wait for anyone, does it?" "No, it doesn't," Caleb agreed. His gaze softened, though his attention remained on her. "But it helps to have someone beside you, someone who sees the effort, not just the mistakes. That makes all the difference." Her stomach tightened, a mixture of longing and awareness she could not yet name. The slow, deliberate pace of their interactions, the shared labor, the quiet guidance, the subtle touches, was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was safe yet intoxicating, comforting, yet stirring emotions she had thought she had no right to feel. "Caleb?" she began hesitantly, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Words felt inadequate. How could she express the strange mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something else she barely understood? He turned toward her, expression open, patient, inviting. "Yes," he prompted gently. I'm not sure," she admitted, voice soft. I don't want to fail here. Not with you. Not after everything." "You won't fail," he said firmly, his voice carrying conviction that reached her in a way few words ever had. "You'll make mistakes, yes, but you'll grow. And I'll be here. That's all I can promise. But it's real. You won't have to face it alone." She felt her throat tighten at the words, and for a moment, the world shrank to the space between them. His presence was steady, unwavering, yet it ignited a fragile hope she had not dared to entertain. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something important. That trust, like courage, could be nurtured slowly, in moments of shared labor, quiet words, and unspoken understanding. As the sun began to lower beyond the horizon, casting longer shadows across the pasture, Evelyn felt herself shifting, growing stronger in ways she hadn't expected. The fear, the self-doubt, the constant scrutiny of others. It all seemed a little more distant now, with Caleb beside her, guiding her, observing her, protecting her in ways he did not need to explain. She understood that this patient companionship, this slow recognition of her worth, was a beginning. A beginning she had never thought she would have. Evelyn woke before the others on the ranch, the sound of the wind rustling through the fence posts mixing with the faint lowing of the cattle. The morning air was crisp, carrying the earthy scent of tilled soil and hay, and for a moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to feel the reality of this place and her new life within it. She knew that the work ahead would test her, physically, emotionally, and in ways she could not yet foresee. But there was a part of her that felt alive. Caleb appeared at the edge of the barn, already saddled and ready to inspect the morning chores. His presence was steady and commanding, yet there was an ease to him that invited her in rather than demanded obedience. "You're up early," he remarked, voice low and calm. His gaze lingered on her with that same quiet scrutiny that had become so familiar, and she felt a faint warmth creep into her chest. "I wanted to get a head start," she admitted. I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," he said simply, though there was a sharpness to his tone that made it clear he would not tolerate self-deprecation. "The work here is hard enough without carrying doubts on top of it. Focus on learning, not proving." She nodded, the words settling around her like a small shield against the nervous tremor she felt. She had grown used to judgment, used to it lingering mercilessly like a shadow, but here, with him, it was different. Here, mistakes could be corrected without ridicule. Weaknesses could be met with patience rather than scorn. Their first task was checking the fences along the northern pasture. The posts had endured harsh weather, some leaning precariously, and it required more strength than she anticipated to reset them. Caleb demonstrated each step with calm precision, and then, without a word, watched as she attempted to replicate his movements. Her hands ached almost immediately, blistering from the rope and the stubborn, weathered wood, and she struggled to lift one particularly stubborn post. Caleb stepped closer, and for a moment she felt the heat of his body so near that it seemed to charge the air between them. "Here," he said, resting his hands over hers, guiding the rope in a way that allowed the post to shift without straining her back. "Use your legs, not just your arms. Let your strength come from balance." Her breath caught as their hands remained pressed together longer than necessary. She could feel the subtle heat of him, the callous strength in his palms, the patience that allowed her to falter without judgment. She straightened slowly, the post secured at last, and looked up to find his gaze fixed on her with something deeper than mere observation. Admiration, concern, and something more unspoken. "You did well," he said, voice soft. "Most wouldn't last this long on their first try." She smiled faintly, cheeks flushed from exertion, and from the awareness of him so close. I had good instruction," she murmured, trying to keep her voice steady. "That too," he admitted, though his smile was subtle, almost reluctant, as if he feared giving away more than he intended. The hours stretched on, and Evelyn grew more accustomed to the rhythm of the ranch. Lifting, pulling, adjusting, and learning the language of the land and animals. Yet the work was not without its trials. By midday, a sudden shout from the far pasture drew their attention. A young calf had broken through a weakened fence and was darting toward the canyon's edge. Evelyn's heart lurched. She knew the danger. The animal could injure itself, and any reckless movement might do the same to her. Caleb's eyes narrowed, and without hesitation, he mounted his horse. "Stay back," he ordered, voice firm yet calm. "Watch and learn. Don't do anything rash." Her hands trembled on the fence as she watched him ride with quiet precision, positioning himself between the calf and the cliff. The animal skittered, panicked, but Caleb's movements were deliberate, controlled, and he managed to guide it back toward the safety of the pasture without harm. The tension in her chest eased only slightly when he dismounted, sweat glinting on his forehead, but with that familiar calm in his eyes. "You did well watching," he said, turning to her. "Most people would have panicked. You stayed composed. That's part of learning here." Evelyn exhaled, the adrenaline leaving her body in a slow wave. I thought I might just freeze," she admitted. "I've never faced anything like that before." Then you learned something today, Caleb said, voice low, carrying a subtle warmth. Fear doesn't have to stop you. You can let it guide you, teach you, rather than dominate you. She nodded, the truth of his words settling deep within her. In that moment, she realized that her time on the ranch was more than work. It was education, in every sense. Learning to trust herself, learning to survive, and learning to accept guidance without shame. And somewhere beneath it all, a quiet awareness stirred within her. A sense that the man beside her was more than an instructor, more than a protector. He was becoming something she had not yet dared to name. The day wore on, and by evening, they returned to the main barn, exhausted but satisfied. Caleb handed her a clean cloth to wipe her hands, and she met his gaze once again. There was a brief, charged silence between them, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared effort and mutual understanding. You're improving faster than I expected, he said, voice quiet, though there was a faint trace of pride beneath it. I think I'm starting to understand, she admitted. Not just the work, but this place, and maybe myself a little more, too. He studied her for a long moment, the intensity in his eyes pulling her awareness toward him, making her heart beat faster than the exertion of the day ever could. Good, he said finally, almost under his breath. That's all anyone can ask. Keep walking, keep learning, and don't be afraid to take the steps that scare you. Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her, the resonance of his words embedding themselves in her chest. It was more than encouragement. It was recognition, and in it, a spark of something tender, something she could not yet name but could not ignore. As they tended the final chores and the ranch quieted for the night, she realized that the day had changed her, not only in skill but in spirit. The work had been hard, the challenges daunting, yet the presence of Caleb beside her had transformed fear into focus, hesitation into cautious confidence. And through it all, she had begun to recognize the slow, undeniable pull of his quiet strength, the subtle reassurance of his guidance, and the tentative stirrings of something far more personal. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Creek, Evelyn felt that she was not merely surviving, but beginning to belong. And in that belonging, she felt a fragile hope, the kind that whispered of new beginnings, trust, and perhaps, in time, love. By the end of that week, Evelyn's hands bore the marks of labor. Faint blisters, small cuts, the soft skin of her former life giving way to something tougher, more enduring. Each scar told a story, of effort, of mistakes learned from, of determination that refused to fade. Caleb noticed, though he never commented. His silences spoke more than most men's speeches ever could. The days had begun to settle into rhythm. Mornings spent tending the animals, afternoons mending or riding the perimeter, evenings quiet with a shared supper and the slow hum of cicadas beneath the dusk. There was comfort in that routine, though Evelyn sensed something unspoken in Caleb lately, a tension that hung in the air like the weight of distant thunder. It came to a head one late afternoon, as heavy clouds began to gather low across the horizon. The air grew still, unnaturally so, the kind of quiet that made the hair rise on one's arms. Evelyn stood by the corral fence, staring toward the western ridge. "It looks bad," she murmured. Caleb followed her gaze, jaw tightening. "Could be a strong one. Wind'll tear through if we don't get things fastened down. I'll need your help if you're steady for it." "I am," she said without hesitation, though her voice trembled just slightly. They worked quickly, securing loose tools, covering feed sacks, checking the doors and windows of the barn. The first rumble rolled across the valley, deep and warning, and moments later, a sharp wind whipped through, carrying with it the scent of dust and rain. Evelyn's skirt snapped around her legs, and she struggled to keep her footing as she fastened the last latch. Caleb appeared beside her, steadying her with one firm hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he said, his voice barely audible above the rising wind. "You did fine. Let's get inside before it breaks." But the storm was faster than they expected. A jagged line of lightning split the sky, followed by a deafening crack of thunder. The horses whinnied in panic, hooves clattering against the stalls. Without thinking, Evelyn darted toward them. Evelyn! Caleb's shout was lost in the wind, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Some instinct, raw and unreasoned, drove her forward. The horses needed calming, and if she'd learned anything from Caleb, it was that fear multiplied when left unchecked. She reached the largest stall and pressed her hand to the mare's neck, whispering soothing nonsense over the roar of the wind. The animal shifted, trembling, but gradually eased under her touch. She barely noticed Caleb appear at her side until his arm came around her waist, pulling her back as another flash of lightning lit the barn. "Don't ever run into a storm like that," he said, his tone harsh but his eyes full of something that wasn't anger. Fear, relief, something tangled between them. "You could have been struck." "I couldn't leave them," she breathed, still shaking, hair plastered to her cheek by the wind. "They were terrified." "So was I," he said quietly. The words silenced her. For a moment, neither moved. The rain came down in torrents, drumming against the roof in relentless rhythm. Caleb's hand was still on her waist, firm but gentle, as though he wasn't ready to let her go. And though part of her knew she should step back, she didn't, couldn't. Their eyes met, his dark with restraint, hers wide with unspoken emotion. "You're brave," he said at last, his voice rough, "but don't ever mistake bravery for recklessness." She nodded, her throat tight. I didn't think. I just acted. That's what scares me," he murmured. His hand slipped away then, leaving a warmth in its absence that made her feel colder than the wind ever could. When the worst of the storm had passed, they stood in silence, watching as rain streaked down the open doorway. The air smelled of wet earth and relief. Evelyn's pulse began to steady, but her thoughts did not. Caleb moved beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, and the quiet between them felt charged with something fragile and dangerous. "I've seen storms like this take everything a man owns," he said after a long pause. "Fences, barns, homes? It doesn't take much for it all to come undone." Evelyn looked at him then, studying the rough planes of his face, the faint scar near his temple, the weariness in his eyes. "And what about people?" she asked softly. "Can storms take them too?" He met her gaze, and something flickered there. Pain, memory, maybe both. "They can," he said. "Sometimes the hardest ones aren't the kind that come from the sky." She didn't ask what he meant. The words carried too much weight, the kind that came from experience. And though he offered no details, she felt something open between them. A glimpse of the man beneath the calm, beneath the stoic quiet. When the rain slowed, Caleb moved to check the damage outside, and Evelyn followed. The land glistened in the fading light, the sky streaked with violet and gray. They worked together to right a fallen fence, their clothes soaked, hands numb from the chill. Yet neither complained. Something was grounding about the shared effort, the unity of it. As they finished, Evelyn caught him watching her again. His gaze not the careful study of a teacher now, but something deeper, searching. "You don't give up easily," he said finally. "I've had to learn not to," she replied, pushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "If I stop moving, I think I'd lose myself." He nodded slowly, as though understanding more than she'd said aloud. "You remind me of the land here," he said, his voice almost tender. "Soft in some ways, stubborn in others. Beautiful even when it's fighting to survive." The compliment, if that's what it was, caught her off guard. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such quiet reverence. Her heart stumbled in her chest, and for the first time, she could not meet his gaze. They returned to the barn in silence, the storm fading into a distant rumble. The lamps glowed warm against the damp wood, and Evelyn felt an unfamiliar peace settle over her. She knew they would speak little of what had happened. Caleb was not the kind of man to linger on words, but something between them had changed. The air felt different now, charged with understanding and something more delicate, unspoken. That night, as she lay in the small loft room Caleb had offered her, Evelyn listened to the wind ease through the open window and thought of his hand on her waist. His voice saying he'd been scared. For the first time in years, she didn't feel mocked or fragile or alone. She felt seen. And for a woman who'd once been told she'd never belong anywhere, that was enough to make her heart ache in the best way possible. The morning after the storm, the ranch was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The rain had softened the earth, leaving a rich, damp scent that mingled with hay and leather, and the fields shimmered under the muted light of a sun filtered through lingering clouds. Evelyn moved carefully across the yard, her boots leaving soft impressions in the mud, each step reminding her of the exertions of the previous day. Caleb was already outside, tending to the fences that had taken the brunt of the storm. His sleeves were rolled high, forearms glistening with the remnants of water and grime. He glanced toward her as she approached, and she felt a familiar flutter of awareness in her chest, the same pull she had felt when their hands brushed while securing the corral or guiding the mare. "Morning," he said, voice low, steady. "Sleep well." Evelyn hesitated before answering. Sleep had been restless, haunted by shadows of her past. The grief, the judgment, the unceasing pressure to be more than she felt she could be. Yet at the same time, she had dreamed of this place, of the quiet strength of the man beside her, and the strange possibility that she could belong here, if only she dared. "I did," she replied, voice soft, almost unsure. "I kept thinking of yesterday, how you handled the storm. I didn't know a man could be so calm and strong all at once." Caleb gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Calm is a choice," he said simply. "Strength is the same. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's loud, but it's always tested." Evelyn's gaze followed him as he checked the fencing, noting the ease and precision of his movements. There was a rhythm to him, a confidence that made the rough edges of the world seem manageable. Yet beneath that exterior, she sensed a hidden depth, a man shaped by experiences she could not yet name. She took a deep breath and decided, suddenly, to speak more than she usually allowed herself. "Caleb, why did you come to Cedar Creek?" Her voice was tentative, vulnerable. "I mean, why stay here, building this life? After everything?" For a brief moment, he paused, hammer in hand, and looked toward the horizon as if weighing his words. The tension in his jaw softened slightly, and Evelyn noticed the faint scar near his temple, a remnant she had seen before but never considered. "Because it's mine," he said finally. "Not just the land, but the work, the life I've built. After losing people, after the war, after the things I've had to bury inside me, I needed something steady, something that mattered. This place, this work, it gives me that." She nodded slowly, understanding in a way that surprised her. Loss, endurance, survival. She had carried her own burdens for years, though of a different kind. "I think I understand," she murmured. "I came west for freedom, but maybe I've been running from the same things you've faced. Fear, regret, judgment." He turned to her then, eyes dark with an intensity that made her heart stumble. "And yet you came anyway. That takes more courage than most realize. You face what others run from." Evelyn felt warmth rise to her cheeks. The words were not flattery, they were truth. He saw her, not the woman she presented to the world, but the one underneath, and that acknowledgement stirred something she could not yet name. They worked side by side for hours, mending fences, stacking feed, tending the livestock. Every brush of hands, every accidental touch, carried a weight neither dared speak aloud. There was comfort in proximity, but a simmering tension too, as if each movement toward closeness came with the risk of awakening feelings neither could fully control. Later, Caleb suggested a break near the creek that ran through the property. They sat on a fallen log, boots dangling over the water, and watched the flow, quiet but alive. The silence between them was not awkward. It was intimate, a space where words could be unnecessary. Evelyn found herself daring to glance at him, noting the way the sunlight caught the edges of his face, the strength in his hands, the quiet command of his presence. "Evelyn," he said after a long pause, voice low, measured, "do you ever think about the past?" She swallowed, glancing down at the water. "Every day," she admitted softly. "Sometimes I wish I could forget it all, but it seems impossible. I try not to let it define me, though. I know that feeling, he said quietly, eyes on the stream. There are things I've seen, done, that I try not to carry anymore. But they don't leave easily. They shape you whether you want them to or not. For a long moment, they shared the weight of unspoken histories, two souls acknowledging burdens that had brought them here, to this place, to each other. Evelyn felt an almost desperate hope that she could trust him, not just with the work of the ranch, not just with safety, but with the delicate truths of her own heart. She began, hesitating. I don't know if I've ever had someone really see me the way you do. Caleb's gaze met hers, unwavering, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the creek seemed to disappear. Then see this, he said quietly. Not as judgment, not as pity, just as it is. You're not perfect, you're not fragile, you're strong, and He stopped abruptly, as if realizing the weight of what he might say. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest, aware of the fragile line between confession and restraint. And you? She whispered. What about you? He looked away for a moment, jaw tight. Me? He murmured. I'm learning, I suppose. Learning that sometimes letting someone in doesn't make you weak. And that, sometimes, it's worth the risk. Her breath caught. There it was, something they both felt but neither had named. A pull, undeniable and compelling, rooted in trust, shared struggle, and the quiet acknowledgement of what had been lost and what could still be found. The moments stretched between them, fragile, suspended, until a distant clatter of hooves reminded them that the world still existed beyond their bubble of intimacy. Caleb rose first, offering a hand that she took without hesitation. The warmth of his touch lingered, a tether between them that spoke louder than words. As they returned to the ranch house, side by side, Evelyn realized something profound. That trust, once built, could be as intoxicating as any passion. And that in Caleb Boone, she had found someone willing to see her fully, to meet her strength with his own, and to guard the fragile beginnings of something far more lasting than either had dared hope. That evening, as she prepared for bed, she found herself smiling quietly. The storm had passed, the ranch had survived, and in the midst of it all, a connection had formed. A slow, deliberate bond that promised more than safety, more than companionship. Something tender, compelling, and entirely new had taken root in her heart. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was not just surviving but living, and maybe, just maybe, loving. The following days passed in a rhythm Evelyn was beginning to recognize as both comforting and demanding. Dawn to dusk chores, careful tending of the land, and the quiet companionship of Caleb Boone shaped a life she had once thought impossible for herself. Yet as she moved through the ranch, the sense of peace she had begun to feel was suddenly undercut by a subtle unease. It began with the cattle. A few heads had gone missing, wandering farther than usual along the northern ridge. Caleb noticed it first, his brow furrowing in a way that made Evelyn sit up a little straighter, aware that something more than lost livestock was troubling him. They're smart, but not clever enough to escape entirely, he muttered, inspecting the fences along the ridge. Someone's been careless, or someone's been testing us. Evelyn approached him cautiously, mindful of the tension in his stance. Testing us? She repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. Could be a rustler, he said, jaw tight. Could be someone from the other settlements. Doesn't matter which. The result's the same. We lose stock if we're not careful. She swallowed, realizing the harsh reality of frontier life in a way she had not fully grasped before. Survival wasn't just about hard work and resilience. It was about vigilance, about defending everything you'd built against forces you might not even see coming. Yet as she looked at him, moving with quiet precision and alertness, she also saw a kind of confidence that reassured her. They could meet these challenges together. The next day, Caleb decided they would ride along the northern boundary to check the fences and assess the situation. Evelyn mounted her horse, nerves tingling with anticipation, yet she found an unexpected steadiness in her own movements. The lessons of the past weeks, learning the land, the animals, and Caleb's patient guidance, had given her a quiet strength. She could feel it now, pulsing beneath her ribs, and it was intoxicating. As they rode, the tension between them seemed to grow, subtle yet undeniable. Every accidental brush of their hands on the reins, every time their horses drew close along the narrow trail, carried a weight neither dared name. It was a slow, smoldering current of desire, tempered by respect and the knowledge that rushing could shatter the fragile trust they had nurtured. They reached the northern ridge and dismounted, carefully inspecting the fence lines. Caleb's sharp eyes caught a gap where the fence had been unceremoniously loosened. He knelt beside it, examining the wood and wire with a practiced hand, while Evelyn lingered nearby, heart beating faster than the exertion of the climb would justify. "Someone's been here recently," he muttered, tracing a finger along a fresh hoof print that did not belong to their stock, either testing for weaknesses or scouting. Evelyn shivered, the reality of danger pressing close. "What do we do?" she asked, voice quiet, almost fearful, though she stood her ground beside him. "We fix this," he said simply, voice calm but edged with steel. "Then we keep watch. No surprises." As they worked to repair the fence, the proximity between them became harder to ignore. Their shoulders brushed repeatedly, and on more than one occasion, their hands met while securing posts or tightening wire. Each contact sent a thrill through Evelyn that she could not name, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and longing that left her breathless. Caleb, for his part, remained composed, though the subtle tension in his posture betrayed that he felt it too. By late afternoon, they had finished the repairs. Caleb leaned against a fence post, wiping sweat from his brow, while Evelyn adjusted her hat and tried to collect herself. For a moment, they simply regarded each other, the silence heavy with things unspoken. "You're handling this better than I expected," Caleb said finally, his tone softer now, almost intimate. "Most would be trembling or complaining by now." Evelyn met his gaze, feeling a flicker of something daring and tender in her chest. I've had good instruction," she murmured, voice low. Her hand brushed against the post, lingering slightly near his as if daring to reach closer without permission. Caleb's eyes darkened, a subtle shift that made her pulse quicken. "And you've got courage," he said quietly. "I've seen it in small things, how you handle the horses, the fences, the work, but also how you face things that scare you." Her chest tightened, and she swallowed, realizing that the storm of the past week, the physical exertion, the fear, the shared challenges, had brought them closer than words alone could convey. She wanted to speak, to bridge the space between them, yet a careful restraint kept her voice caught in her throat. "Caleb?" she began, then faltered, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. He stepped closer, the air between them charged. "Yes." His voice was soft, patient, yet firm, as if inviting her to trust him without hesitation. Evelyn's heart pounded, and for the briefest of moments, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to reach for him, to let go of fear entirely. The tension was intoxicating, a slow-burning fire that neither dared extinguish. A sudden noise from the edge of the ridge shattered the fragile moment. A shout, sharp and urgent. Both turned toward the sound, horses tensing, and Caleb's expression hardened in an instant. It was a neighbor, calling to warn them of rustlers spotted along the southern boundary. "Move quickly," Caleb ordered, urgency threading his normally steady voice. "We'll deal with this. Stay close, Evelyn." The ride back was brisk, tense, every sense alert. Evelyn clung to the reins, heart racing from both adrenaline and the remnants of the charged moment with Caleb. Though danger had interrupted what had almost been intimacy, the memory of the closeness between them lingered, impossible to ignore. By the time they reached the ranch, they were both drenched in sweat and mud, but alive and together. Caleb dismounted first, offering a hand to help Evelyn down. Their fingers brushed briefly, and though neither spoke of it, the unspoken acknowledgement passed between them. A promise, fragile but undeniable, that something deeper was growing between them. That evening, after securing the ranch against any further threats, They sat quietly near the barn. Neither pressed the conversation, but the weight of shared experiences, the storm, the work, the near danger, had drawn them irrevocably closer. Evelyn's thoughts lingered on the brush of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, and the restrained yet undeniable desire simmering between them. She realized, with a mix of fear and longing, that she was no longer merely surviving the frontier. She was living, learning, and perhaps opening herself to something entirely new. And Caleb, steady, patient, commanding, was at the center of that revelation, a presence that both terrified and thrilled her in ways she could not yet name. As night fell, Evelyn lay awake, listening to the wind whisper through the rafters, and she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The slow, deliberate pull of her heart toward Caleb Boone was unstoppable, and whether by storm, challenge, or shared labor, that connection would only deepen in the days to come. The morning air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain-damp earth and pine, and Evelyn felt a tingle of anticipation as she adjusted her hat and followed Caleb toward the southern boundary. The warning from the previous evening weighed on them both. Rustlers were on the move, testing the ranch's defenses, and every step carried the possibility of confrontation. Caleb rode ahead, horse steady beneath him, while Evelyn's nerves danced between excitement and fear. The quiet rhythm of the ride contrasted sharply with the tension that had coiled inside her all morning. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of brush, made her pulse quicken. Yet beneath it, she felt a strange exhilaration. She was no longer the timid woman who had arrived in Cedar Creek. She was learning, growing, surviving, and perhaps, in ways she hadn't fully admitted, thriving in the presence of Caleb Boone. "Keep your eyes sharp," Caleb instructed, voice low, calm but edged with authority. "They'll try to make a move where we least expect it. Don't let fear lead you into a mistake." Evelyn nodded, gripping the reins tightly. She felt the horse beneath her shiver, sensing her tension, and she took a steadying breath, recalling every lesson Caleb had imparted. Patience, observation, respect for the land, and trust in oneself. They reached the ridge overlooking the southern pasture, and Caleb slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. The brush was thick, and the shifting shadows played tricks on the eyes. Then, just as the wind carried a faint sound of hooves over dry grass, Caleb stiffened. "There," he muttered, pointing toward a shadowy figure moving along the ridge below. Two of them, probably looking for the easy way in. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she followed Caleb's lead, keeping her movements deliberate. He dismounted first, guiding her down the slope with careful instructions. "Stay low," he whispered. "We'll need to approach quietly." The rustlers had not yet spotted them, busy attempting to cut a weak section of fence. Caleb's jaw was set, and though his voice remained calm, there was an intensity in his movements that made Evelyn acutely aware of the man beside her. The precision, the command, the restrained danger. She had never seen him like this before, and a shiver of admiration, and something more intimate, ran through her. Caleb crept closer, signaling for Evelyn to follow. She moved cautiously, aware that every step could either keep them hidden or reveal them. Her heart pounded with the thrill of danger, and for the first time, she realized how much she trusted Caleb, not only with her safety but with the fragile stirrings of her heart. "On my mark," he whispered. "Distract, but don't engage unless necessary." Evelyn nodded, gripping a small length of rope she had carried for emergencies. Caleb moved with a predator's grace, silent and calculated, while Evelyn mimicked his movements as best she could. Her hands brushed against the rope, a reminder that she was learning, growing, and, despite the fear, finding a measure of courage she hadn't known existed. Then, as one of the rustlers lifted a lantern, their faces illuminated briefly in the dim morning light, Evelyn froze. Caleb's hand brushed against hers in a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through her. She glanced at him, eyes wide with the unspoken acknowledgement of both fear and something more tender, before he signaled her to move forward. The confrontation was swift. Caleb sprang from cover, voice commanding, a gun leveled, and eyes unwavering. The rustlers froze, surprise written plainly on their faces. Evelyn, heart racing, felt herself stepping forward as well. A courage born from weeks of learning, observing, and trusting the man beside her. Leave, now. Caleb's voice cut across the morning air, low and unyielding. You're not welcome here. One of the rustlers took a step back, hands raised. We didn't want trouble, he muttered, though his eyes darted nervously between Caleb and Evelyn. Then leave, Caleb repeated, voice sharper, carrying the weight of authority and the promise of retribution should they ignore him. The figures melted back into the shadows, leaving the ranch and the pasture intact. Evelyn's chest heaved with adrenaline, her hands trembling slightly as she steadied her horse. Caleb's gaze softened as he turned to her, a faint, approving smile on his lips. You did well, he said quietly, though the intensity in his eyes betrayed more than mere commendation. Most people freeze, panic, or retreat. You didn't. Evelyn felt her cheeks warm, not just from the exertion, but from the closeness between them, the subtle acknowledgement of her courage, and the thrill of having impressed him. I didn't want to let you down, she admitted softly. You never could, he murmured, his voice low enough that it brushed against her like a caress. You've got fire. I've noticed it since the first day. It's compelling. Her breath caught. Compelling? She repeated, the word carrying an intimacy she hadn't expected. He gave a small, almost reluctant smile, and for a heartbeat, their eyes locked, the tension between them electric and undeniable. Neither spoke further, but the unspoken understanding was clear. The slow pull of their hearts, tempered by respect and shared experience, was becoming impossible to ignore. The rest of the day passed in a blur of repairs, cattle checks, and quiet reflection. Evelyn's hands bore the marks of the morning's tension, but she felt alive in a way that made every ache and blister worth it. She had faced fear, worked alongside Caleb, and, in her own way, proved her courage not just to him, but to herself. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, they rode back toward the ranch house. The silence between them was comfortable, heavy with shared understanding and lingering anticipation. Evelyn found herself stealing glances at Caleb, noticing the curve of his jaw, the strength in his shoulders, and the way his eyes softened when he caught her gaze. When they reached the barn, Caleb dismounted first, offering a hand to help her down. Their fingers brushed, and this time, neither pulled away immediately. The moment lingered, delicate and charged, a silent acknowledgement of the growing bond between them. I thank you, Evelyn said softly, voice almost a whisper, for trusting me. Caleb's hand remained lightly against hers. You earned it, he replied, tone low, almost intimate. Every day, you prove that you're capable, that you can face what others can't. That makes all the difference. Her heart ached with a combination of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper she could not yet name. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Creek, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she was not only safe but cherished, where courage and trust could lead to something tender, compelling, and lasting. As night fell, the stars emerging in the clear sky above, Evelyn lay in her loft, replaying the day's events. She had faced danger, survived it, and discovered a new measure of strength within herself. And somewhere beneath it all, the slow, deliberate pull of her heart toward Caleb Boone had deepened, an undeniable truth she could neither fight nor ignore. For the first time, the frontier did not feel harsh or lonely. It felt alive, filled with challenges, revelations, and the slow, tantalizing promise of love. The morning after the encounter with the rustlers brought a fragile calm over the ranch. The sun rose pale and golden, brushing the fields with a gentle light that seemed almost forgiving after the tension of the past days. Evelyn moved through her chores with a quiet determination, the adrenaline of yesterday giving way to a steadier, more reflective rhythm. Caleb, too, was subdued. He moved among the animals with his usual precision, but there was a softness in his eyes whenever he glanced her way. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it did not escape Evelyn. Something had shifted between them. The shared danger, the reliance, the acknowledgement of courage, that had deepened the bond in ways neither had fully voiced. She approached him near the barn, carrying a basket of feed. "Everything seems all right this morning," she observed, careful to keep her tone casual. Caleb's head tilted slightly, his eyes meeting hers with a weight that made her pulse quicken. "For now," he said, voice low. "But the land, it has its own way of testing us. That's part of living out here. You never truly know what's coming." She nodded, feeling the truth in his words. There was a beauty in that uncertainty, a way of life that demanded resilience, patience, and trust. Not just in oneself, but in the people who stood beside you. And she trusted Caleb more than anyone she had ever known. They worked together throughout the morning, tending to fences, checking water troughs, and feeding the animals. Their movements were synchronized in a way that had become familiar, a shared rhythm born of necessity and unspoken understanding. Each brush of hands, each accidental touch, carried an electric charge beneath the surface, a slow, tantalizing reminder of the connection growing between them. After the last of the morning chores, Caleb suggested they take a break near the creek that cut through the eastern pasture. Evelyn mounted her horse and followed him, the water sparkling in the sunlight, birds darting across its surface. The world seemed peaceful for the first time in days, and yet the tension between them remained, subtle but persistent. They dismounted and sat on a fallen log, legs dangling over the water. Evelyn's heart was still fluttering from the lingering fear of the rustlers and the adrenaline of surviving together, but now a different kind of anticipation had settled over her. She was acutely aware of Caleb's presence beside her, the strength in his shoulders, the warmth in his eyes, the gentle assurance of his nearness. "You're quiet today," he observed, breaking the silence. "I'm thinking," she admitted softly, "about everything that's happened, about you." Caleb's gaze flicked to her, sharp but tender. "About me?" he repeated, a hint of curiosity in his tone. Evelyn swallowed, the words catching in her throat. "About how I feel safe with you, about how I think I trust you more than I've trusted anyone." For a heartbeat, Caleb said nothing. Then he shifted slightly, closing some of the distance between them without breaking the delicate tension. "That's important," he said finally, voice low. "Trust isn't given lightly out here. It's earned, day by day, through actions, through presence. You've earned mine, Evelyn. And I don't take that lightly." Her chest tightened at his words, a warmth spreading through her that had little to do with the sun. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance, to feel the steady strength she had come to rely on. But caution held her back, as it always did in the presence of something so powerful, so fragile, so entirely new. "You're different from anyone I've known," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Quiet but strong, protective but patient. She trailed off, uncertainty mingling with longing. Caleb's hand brushed hers, tentative, almost casual, yet deliberate enough to send a shiver through her. "I know," he said simply, "and I feel the same, more than I probably should, for the time being." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Neither pressed further, yet the tension was undeniable, a slow-burning heat that neither could ignore. They sat in silence, watching the creek flow, letting the world shrink around them until it consisted only of the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the unspoken bond between them. Hours passed, measured not by the clock but by the gentle rhythm of life on the ranch. When Caleb finally stood, brushing mud from his trousers, Evelyn rose as well. They mounted their horses and rode back toward the house, side by side but not touching, yet acutely aware of the subtle magnetic pull between them. Back at the barn, they tended the animals again, preparing for the approaching evening. The golden light of sunset cast long shadows across the fields, bathing the world in warmth and color. Evelyn caught Caleb watching her as she worked, and for a fleeting moment, she wondered if he felt the same pull she did, the same mixture of longing, caution, and awe that had taken root in her chest. Later, As they sat for supper, the conversation was light but edged with meaning. Caleb asked about her life before Cedar Creek, and she shared bits and pieces. The small town she had left behind, the pressures she had endured, the grief she had carried silently. In turn, he shared fragments of his past, carefully chosen, revealing the weight of battles fought, losses endured, and lessons learned. Each revelation drew them closer, knitting their lives together with threads of understanding and respect. After supper, they stepped outside to the porch, the stars bright and countless above them. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant earth. Caleb stood beside her, the night stretching around them, and for a moment, neither spoke. "You've changed," he said finally, voice low and intimate. "Since the day you arrived, I've seen you grow stronger, braver, more yourself. It's remarkable to watch." Evelyn's heart fluttered, warmth pooling in her chest. I owe a lot of that to you," she admitted softly. "You've taught me, guided me, trusted me when I wasn't sure I deserved it." Caleb's gaze softened, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them, the quiet night, and the invisible thread connecting their hearts. "You deserve every bit of trust, Evelyn," he said, voice almost a whisper. "And more than that, perhaps." Her pulse quickened. The words, the intent behind them, the proximity. It was a delicate, compelling moment, charged with possibility. She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the distance, but the slow-burning restraint that had governed their relationship held her back. Yet even in the restraint, there was intimacy, there was connection, there was a promise that neither dared articulate fully. As they finally parted for the night, Evelyn climbed to her loft with her heart pounding, mind racing, and a quiet, aching hope that the slow pull between them would continue to grow. She had faced storms, rustlers, and the harshness of frontier life, but nothing had tested her heart like Caleb Boone, and she realized, with both fear and longing, that she did not want the test to end. For in the midst of this rugged, unpredictable world, she had found a constant, a presence she could rely on, a heart that beat alongside hers in silent understanding. And perhaps, just perhaps, love, slow, deliberate, and undeniable, was beginning to bloom amidst the dust, sweat, and wild beauty of Cedar Creek. The dawn was cool, the horizon brushed with gold and pink, a gentle promise of a day untouched by storms or rustlers. Evelyn rose early, as she had learned to do, savoring the quiet before the land stirred fully to life. The chores seemed lighter today, less a burden and more a ritual she had come to cherish, the rhythm of survival, of tending, of belonging. Caleb was already in the barn, the low hum of his movements blending with the soft bleating of sheep and the clatter of hooves. Evelyn paused at the door, watching him for a moment, taking in the strength in his shoulders, the care in his hands, the quiet intensity in his eyes. She felt a pull, a delicate ache of longing, as though every moment spent in his presence deepened the unspoken bond between them. "Morning," he greeted, not looking up. "Morning," she replied softly, stepping inside. The air smelled of hay, leather, and the faint tang of morning dew. They worked together in silence at first, each comfortable with the other's presence, the language of labor filling the gaps where words would have been too cumbersome. The slow rhythm of the ranch, the way their hands occasionally brushed as they moved between tasks, was intimate in its simplicity. Evelyn felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had little to do with exertion. Once the morning chores were complete, Caleb suggested they check the fences along the eastern pasture, the area most vulnerable during storms. Evelyn mounted her horse, heart fluttering in anticipation. The trail was narrow and lined with oaks, the ground still damp from the recent rains. As they rode, their horses' steps fell into a steady cadence, and Evelyn felt a sense of connection she had not known before. Side by side, they moved not as teacher and student, but as equals, two souls navigating the same rugged path. At the far end of the pasture, they dismounted and approached a section of fence Caleb had long planned to reinforce. As he worked, Evelyn handed him tools, her hands occasionally brushing his in brief, fleeting touches that made her heart skip. Caleb's glances lingered, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement, and the tension between them had become a palpable current, simmering just beneath the surface. "Evelyn," he said quietly, voice low enough that only she could hear. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you, something I should have said before." She looked up at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "What is it?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb set the hammer down and took a deliberate step closer, the space between them charged with emotion. I don't know how to say this without risking everything," he admitted, eyes dark and earnest. "But the truth is, you've become more than a companion, more than someone I trust. You've become the reason I want to stay, the reason I want more than this life alone." Evelyn's breath caught. The words hung in the morning air, heavy with vulnerability and longing. She felt the pull of her own heart, the slow, undeniable tug toward him. "Caleb, she began, but her words faltered, caught in the swell of emotion. He reached out then, hesitating just a heartbeat, before taking her hand in his. The touch was firm, protective yet tender, a promise rather than a plea. "You don't have to say it," he murmured. "I can feel it in everything you do, in the way you move through this land, the way you face fear, the way you trust me." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a burgeoning joy she had thought impossible. "I trust you," she whispered, voice trembling, "more than I've ever trusted anyone." Caleb's thumb brushed lightly across the back of her hand, anchoring her in the moment. "Then that's enough," he said softly, "because I trust you, too, more than I can say." They stood there for a long moment, the weight of words unnecessary now, replaced by the language of hearts finally aligned. The wind rustled through the trees, the soft hum of the creek in the distance, and the world seemed to hold its breath with them. Evelyn's gaze dropped to the ground for a moment, then back up to Caleb. "I never thought I'd find someone who sees me," she admitted, "truly sees me. And I never thought I'd find someone worth seeing," he replied quietly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But here you are, and He faltered, then gathered himself, the weight of his emotions evident in the set of his shoulders. "I can't imagine a life without you." The words, simple yet profound, wrapped around her heart. Evelyn felt the barriers she had carried for so long crumble, replaced by a gentle, compelling certainty. She stepped closer, closing the space between them, and rested her forehead against his chest. The sound of his heartbeat steadied hers, and she allowed herself to melt into the warmth and strength of his embrace. For a moment, there was no past, no storms, no fear. Only the two of them, bound by trust, courage, and the slow, deliberate pull of love. Caleb's arms tightened around her, protective and grounding. "You're remarkable," he murmured, voice rough with emotion. "I've watched you grow, face danger, and rise stronger than before. And now, I want to be the one beside you, through everything." "I want that too," she whispered, lifting her gaze to meet his. The vulnerability in her eyes mirrored his own, raw and unguarded. "I want to walk with you, always." A faint smile touched his lips, and he lowered his forehead to hers, inhaling the faint scent of hay, sweat, and her own quiet fragrance. "Then we'll do it," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You walk with me, and I'll walk with you, together." And in that moment, amidst the fields, fences, and rugged beauty of Cedar Creek, a promise was made, not with gold, nor with grand gestures, but with truth, trust, and hearts finally aligned. The days that followed were gentle yet vivid, each one deepening their bond. They worked side by side, shared quiet meals, laughed at small misadventures, and found joy in the simplest moments. A horse nuzzling her shoulder, the sun glinting on the creek, Caleb's hand brushing hers as they repaired a fence. Evelyn discovered a strength she had never known, tempered by the tenderness of being truly seen. Caleb revealed the quiet layers of his heart, the patience and care beneath his rugged exterior, and the man who had once seemed so stoic now opened in ways he had never dared before. And when evening fell, the silvery moon casting soft light across the pastures, they would sit together, shoulders touching, hearts aligned, the world quiet around them. There was no need for grand declarations, for rushed confessions. Their love had grown slowly, deliberately, nourished by shared trials, mutual respect, and the undeniable pull of two hearts finding each other in a harsh, beautiful world. In the end, the townsfolk who had mocked her walk, her posture, and her very presence no longer mattered. For Evelyn Boone, or Evelyn Boone in heart, if not yet in name, walked with Caleb, and that was all the affirmation she would ever need. Not because she had changed to fit their judgments, but because she had found a life worth standing in, a man who honored her strength and courage, and a love that required no pretense, only truth. And as the wind whispered through the open fields and the stars glimmered like distant fires, Evelyn knew that wherever the path led, she would walk it with Caleb Boone. Through storms, challenges, and quiet golden mornings, she would walk with him. And in that truth, she found her home, her courage, and the slow, enduring rhythm of love that would carry her forward for the rest of her life. Because she walked, yes, she had always walked, but now she walked with him.